Okay, now it's getting interested. I'm now gonna show you how I process the groups. As I told you before, I route all my individual tracks into groups, and the processing of the groups is an important part of my mixing. So now I'm gonna start with the bassline, and I'm show you how I would typically process the bassline group. So let's check it out. I would start with a clean EQ and sweep for some annoying resonances or some annoying spots in the frequency spectrum. Maybe you are questioning yourself, why do we clean it now? Because we already cleaned the kick and the bass, but since they are now playing together, it's a different source. So I always check if I find some annoying stuff. So let's see. I don't know, there's not much to do. Here I like to add a little bit. Then after I cleaned it and EQ'd it a little bit, I would use a compressor. Personally, I like for kick and bass compression, I like the Shadow Hill mastering compressor, which is a pretty nice tool. I also use, I'll show you what I use, the Elysia Alpha compressor to compress my bassline. This one is very clean, very transparent. The Shadow Hill is more coloring. You have different options on the Shadow Hill compressor. For example, you can change between the transformer of the compressor, which is nickel, iron and steel. The nickel is a little bit more sparkle. This one has a little bit more mid-range, and this adds a nice emphasis on the low end. Then what else do I like to use? Sometimes I use the ultramarine compressor from Acoustica Audio. This is a Verimue compressor. It's an emulation, or it's not an emulation, actually it's the same sound because it's sampled with an impulse response from a very rare and unique compressor from the 60s. I think it's an MS compressor, but on the bassline, of course, I use it only in stereo. But now for our example, let's just use the Cubase standard compressor. I think you can get a great sound out of every compressor. It's how you use it and not what you use it. So let's see how we set it up. Okay, it's subtle, but what you can hear is that it glues the sound in a nice way together, and everything now has a better, it sits better in the mix a little bit. It's sounding simply better to my ear. And then after I compress it, I love to use some analog modeling equalizer. I love to use this equalizer here. It's great for mastering. It's my secret weapon. It's not secret anymore now, but it's a low and a high shelf. You can also switch it to a parametric equalizer. And yeah, I simply love the sound of it. And let's see what we can do with it. Okay. Okay, you can already hear that it sounds so much pleasant to the ear, I think. Then what I also try to look for some saturation. I would use the black box from Brainworks. I use it many times, or the VSM3. It's also a great tool for mastering, a compressor saturation plugin for mastering or for group processing, or FabFilter Saturn is also great. Then after I'm using some saturation, sometimes I apply an equalizer again and look if I notch out some stuff. And now let's have a listen, pre-processing and post-processing. It's incredible. Sound so much better. And this is more or less the same way I process all the groups. It's a little bit different, but for the bassline I always start with a clean equalizer, then I add a compressor, an analog EQ, maybe some saturation, maybe some EQ again. And of course the tools vary a little bit. I use different EQs, different compressors, but the process is more or less always the same. And what I also can recommend you is that for when I'm mixing the individual channels, I'm using very basic tools. Most of the time I'm just using the standard EQ and the standard compressor. You can get most sound out of it. And for me, it's always important that I have a workflow, that I'm fast, that I'm not struggling around with anything. And when I process the groups here, now is the stage where I switch to high quality plugins, the ones, for example, I showed you, so that in the individual channels I work with the basic ones, and when I process groups or even when I'm mastering, of course, I'm using the best equipment available. Sometimes I'm also processing the groups with my analog output gear, and that's how I would advise it to you.